Welcome to your Canadiens Connection on Rocket Sports Radio. We are proud to be the trusted source for all things Habs for more than a decade. This is the Canadiens Connection Podcast. Well, hello, everyone out there. Welcome to this week's edition of the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. So great to be back with you all again this week. In case you aren't recognizing my voice, my name is Amy Johnson, the lead correspondent over at our sister site, ahlreport.com. But for today, I'm going to be your host for the next hour, sitting in for Michael Spinella today. This is episode 246 of the Canadiens Connection podcast. And of course, I'm not doing this by myself. That means I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, who is the editor-in-chief, founder, and president of Rocket Sports. That would be Rick Stevens. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Happy June. Welcome back to the studio. And
June?
It is June. It is June.
It's insane. But what I'm really excited about, Rick, of course, is our big topic segment number 2. This will be the third consecutive week running that we are continuing our run-up to the draft with another expert draft analyst coming into the studio for a sit-down interview with you and I this week. It's none other than Jerome Berube, the director of scouting for Hockey Prospect, and he's going to discuss the upcoming draft with us and give a bit of a scouting report on some players that should be in the conversation for the Canadiens with their 5th overall pick. And we might have picked Jerome's brain on a few other things as well. But Jerome Berube is now the director of scouting for Hockey Prospect. They're an independent scouting service, if you're not familiar with them, who provide player evaluations to NHL and CHL teams. Every year they publish what is fondly referred to as the Draft Bible. It's officially called their NHL Draft Black Book, containing extensive scouting reports and draft rankings. And Jerome is joining myself and Rick right now to discuss the upcoming NHL Draft. So continuing our series of interviews with draft experts and analysts in the run-up to the 2023 NHL entry draft coming up later this month. Very happy to say that we have another returning guest appearing here in the studio with us this week, Rick, and that is none other than Jerome Berube, the director of scouting for Hockey Prospect. Always so happy to talk to you, particularly this time of year. Jerome, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, no problem. How are you guys doing?
We're doing
great.
Getting excited for the draft, that's for sure. We know it's a busy time of year for you and all of the team there at Hockey Prospect. And I guess before we get into the kind of the meat and potatoes of what the Habs might have for options with both of their first round selections, I thought perhaps first, people are fans are well familiar with, hockey scouts, and that folks go out and they scout prospects and all year long and so on and so forth, but they might not really understand what that entails. I think there's plenty of fans that might think that it's just sitting around and watching some video, here and there throughout the week. But it's actually much more involved than that. I think that the job of a hockey scout is one of the most intense throughout the year. And so we thought we would just start with just having you describe in general, what is life as a scout like for you? How much do you travel? How many prospects do you cover? Things like that, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to be in the rink a lot during the season.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're in the rink. You will watch players. You probably know which player you're going to watch as soon as you get there. Like you have at least an idea of who you have to watch. If you're only scouting for the NHL draft, you kind of just by the birthday of the player, who you're gonna have to watch. But you have connection. You know who you're supposed to watch and who really matters. And the part about scouting that is less fun is actually when you get back home. This is when you write your reports. So, like the watching hockey, like well, that's great. But the writing reports is the less fun part of the gig. But it's something you have to do. Obviously, it's part of the gig. And yeah, and also I think another part of scouting is you need to have like a good good contacts, because it's one thing to know player on the ice. Oh, I can evaluate his skating, I can evaluate his hockey sense, his compete level, whatever. But you have to know the kids. You have to able to ask question to like coaches or anybody really, so you can find some is this off the ice, how is this kid, is he a hard worker in the gym or all that kind of info. So it takes a while to figure out like really a player, and player at that age, they change so quickly. So yeah, that's like I would say the main part of the gig. You need to know what you're doing when you're scouting. Like you need to know like what you're looking at on the ice, but you also need to find, in some case, some info like off the ice about some players, not to have like bad surprise. We do interview some kids at some points in the year, but obviously not like NHL teams, obviously, but we still do it, for a few kids, and yeah.
Well, it's like I think that some fans, there's lots of information out there on prospects, and you see the typical 2 or 3 lines about a prospect, good hockey sense, quick release kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about in the kind of, you talked about writing reports. The reports that you folks put together at Hockey Prospect are detailed. I have copies of your NHL Black Book when I used to get the printed copies, and they're Bibles. They are, you guys are the just the resource for wonderful information, extensive scouting reports, and extensive draft rankings, and it's just an excellent resource for fans, for media, for hockey ops personnel from junior hockey right up to the NHL. And so talk about your scouting service and how you guys are a little bit different than the kinds of reports we see elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, the website was built in 2004 by Mark Edwards, who's still the big boss, still my boss. And one thing he told me about like those scouting reports that we write, like I don't want your scouting reports to look like something you can read. Well, I was gonna say newspaper, but they don't really exist anymore. But like from a typical media, you're a scout. You can't. I don't want to hear, well, this guy score and at the end of the second period and all that. That doesn't matter. You have to write your report like a scout, and it has to be detailed. So yeah, we have content for fans, some free content, some of it is for subscribers. Also, NHL scout management staff, they do subscribe to our content, and they respect what we do on the website, and it's been going on for almost 2 decades now. So there's a lot of our reputation is pretty good. Mark has done Mark since the beginning has like been in the ranks for NHL draft, OHL draft, and this is how you build relationship with NHL guys. They'll see you nonstop at games. That this is when they're gonna, it's like, who's this guy? And this is how you build a bit your reputation as a scout, And if I look back at our list, since our lists have been pretty good. We didn't. There's not such a thing as a perfect list. That does not exist. But we're pretty happy with like the result of our lists in the past, even if they were controversial at the time. We didn't really care. We just you know you want our opinion. We're giving our opinion. So even if people on Twitter don't like it, it's okay.
Well, speaking of controversial, and not that it was controversial, but you were one of the few ranking agencies, and not that you put out a mock draft, but you had in your rankings Juraj Slafkovsky last year as your number one prospect. You said that he had the talent to be a number one prospect, and yeah, just one of the few that kind of went against the grain and had Slafkovsky at the top of your list.
Yeah. Yeah, we had number one. I think it was not a great draft last year, so it's I don't want people to think Stefkoski should be 90 points, 100-point guys at the NHL level. I don't see that happening, but it is what it is. He was at that time, I think, our number one guy, and I still think he is today. I think Logan Cooley did really well in college this year, but it's really tough to compare guys in college versus a guy in the NHL playing 9 minutes per game. So we're only gonna have our answer if we're right or wrong in 4 or 5 years, and that's how scouting works. It's a sprint. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
That's right. Yeah. a lot of patience. It's the long game. Well, this year, certainly much deeper draft class this year. The potential for some surprises, some excitement, some entertainment, and of course for Habs fans, that very delightful number 5 overall pick kind of looms large, and there's certainly plenty of speculation as to who could go at number 5 overall with the Montreal Canadiens pick. We're going to talk about 3 players that, in particular, that you've identified as potentials to go at that number 5 position. Let's start. Actually, I'm going to hand this over to Rick for the first guy that's we're going to start with.
Well, we had that excellent hockey resource, Mise au Jeu, Lotto Quebec put out this week. They asked the question, who will be the first player drafted by Montreal? And Mise au Jeu said, Matvei Michkov has the best odds of being picked at number 5. So what does a scout say according to, do you agree that he should be in the conversation at number 5?
Oh, definitely should be in the conversation. It just depends if Montreal are okay with not having him for 3 years, and I don't think this was like an amazing year for Michkov. I think he had like a great 2-month stretch with Sochi in the KHL, but the rest of the season there was some up and down moment with him. But at the end of the day, his talent level is really high. He's a bit like, to me, I kind of think of him as a bit like Cole Caulfield. Just knows how to score goals. Not a huge player, not the fastest player, not the best defensive player, not a high-end playmaker, but he knows how to score goals. And it's very similar to Caulfield. I don't know if Montreal is thinking this way, but I am. I look at Caulfield and I'm like, okay, if you're adding Michkov, and then we can even add Lane Hudson from that discussion. You have 3 players that could be 3 of your core player, and all very small. And if you look at in the playoff, there's not many smaller players that are really shining. So I don't know if they think it's a bit of an issue. But you get to fifth overall pick, he definitely has to be in the conversation.
Now, what about a name like Zach Benson? Where does he fit into the picture for you at this position?
Yeah, I feel Benson is, for people that watch him play or even scout, he's impossible to dislike. Super intelligent player, high compete level. So if you want to get scout mad at you, if you don't compete, they'll hate you probably. So Benson, the way he competes, the way he thinks the game is really high end. The problem with him is yes, he's a smaller player like Michkov. Like Michkov is not the fastest skater, but I would say his hockey IQ is better than Michkov, and he competes better than Michkov. I'm just worried about him and about, because he plays like he's about 5'10", 160, and he plays like he's 6'3", 210. I do worry about is injury gonna be a factor?
Mm-hmm.
And, is he gonna be able to play that style at the NHL level? So those are my question mark with him. But overall, I just love the player. But I don't know. I think teams will be a bit worried about, can he play that style at the NHL level? And he got injured at the end of the year. I believe he separated his shoulder, so he missed the end of the regular season and the start of the playoff. So I do wonder about if teams will be a bit worried about, can he be that guy at the NHL level? But he's a ton of fun. He's talented. He works hard. He's one of the more intelligent player in the draft. But can he be that same player at the NHL level with that inside game? I don't know. Well, remains to be seen.
So the U.S. national program produces a lot of high-level talent, and this year, particularly on one line, you had Gabe Perreault, you had Ryan Leonard, and then Will Smith. Will Smith, a very, I think, for my money, kind of a deceptive player, and the way he is able to produce his points. What do you see in Will Smith?
Yeah. If you only watch highlights, you would think Will Smith should go number one in the draft. Highlight reel. If someone makes a highlight reel video on him, it's going to be pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
He's got one of the best pair of hands in the draft. He really is one-on-one ability or high end. As good as anybody in the draft, I would say. Great playmaker, one of the best playmaker in the whole draft. This is some Trevor Zegras to his game. How he super talented, plays center now. I do wonder if he's gonna stay at center at the NHL level, because a bit like Zegras have more around between center and wing, and I know he plays center this year, but I don't know if that's going to be the long-term answer for Zegras at center. And so Smith, my question mark with him are, well, his play away from the puck is very average, if I'm being nice. Not much, physicality. The compete level is okay, but it's not great. So the offense is great. You could say, yeah, this guy's going to be a great regular season player, and then come playoff time, question mark. Because we all know playoff hockey is it's a different beast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
completely.
Yeah, so he needs to add more element to his game. So he needs to be a bit more complete. Because what I noticed with NHL playoff, it's the complete player are the ones shining the most, because they don't really have any weakness in their game, and they're able to make a difference in every zone. They can make a difference. So I think that's what Will Smith is lacking a bit right now. It's more like a better two-way game. So yeah, I do wonder, like, does he stay at center? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So, but the talent level is really, really, really good. So I think it really depends on the team philosophy. I think some team will be really, really, really high on him, like top three, top five in their list, and other team I think could have him, closer to 10. So, Trevor Zegras I think was better than him, and he went, I believe, ninth in his draft year. So it's going to be interesting where Smith goes in the draft.
Just before we look at players at the bottom end of the first round, is there any any players that you see in the top 10 that maybe we're not talking about enough? Other players that you think belong in that 1 to 10 range?
Yeah, I mean, all year we had, Dmitry Simichev and Daniel Butte Daniel Butte has been in our top 10 all year long. He's a big 6'5", 6'6" winger from Russia. And Simichev was 7th in our January list. And I believe he's the best defenseman in the draft. Like, I noticed a lot of Ryan Backer talk, but I take Simichev all day over him. Those two are two of my favorite player in the whole draft. Like, just being a fan of watching them play, those are my two favorite player. So yeah, to answer your question, definitely Simichev and Butte. But if you follow our list during a year, it's not a huge surprise. Honestly, I think if there was no if Russia could play in international tournaments during the year, I think there would be no doubt that they would be talking about top 10, in the top 10 in every list. I think right now just people are not watching them, as much because they're stuck in Russia, basically.
And a little nervous about their availability, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for Michkov, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's hard to find one Russian player that was really good that never came over.
Yeah.
It might take 2, 3, 4 years, but they do end up because they want to play in the best league. So
That's right.
yeah.
So there's a lot of, as we see, there's a ton of questions around the top 10 and even, Montreal's number 5 overall pick. There's an equal amount of questions at the bottom of the first round as well. We know that Montreal has Florida's pick in the first round, which, maybe 3-4 months ago, everyone thought might have a decent kind of middle of the pack placement. Now we know it's either, depending on how the next week and a half to 2 weeks goes in the Stanley Cup final, it's either going to be number 31 or pick number 32. Who do you see if, and that's, of course, the other question is if the Habs decide to retain this pick and don't use it in a trade, if they do select with this pick at number 31 or number 32, who do you see as potential targets for the Canadiens?
Yeah, I think one player I like, and I have him, higher than 31 or 32, is Bradley Nadeau. He's a kid from New Brunswick, but has played in the BCHL for the last 2 years. He's going to Maine University next season. I think he's really talented. He's a about 5'10", 5'11" winger. His skill level is really high. He's got one of the best shots in the draft. He's also very smart. He thinks the game quickly. He was hands down the best player in the BCHL this year. So I think if he's there at 31, I think he'd be a great option for Montreal. He goes to college. You can leave him there for 2-3 years, and Maine is a decent program in hockey. I think if he's there at 31, I think he's definitely a good option for them.
One of the things that you've been saying with respect to the other prospects is the difference between the regular season and the playoffs. And what interested me was, with respect to Bradley Nadeau, he was not only the MVP of the regular season for the BCHL, but he was also the playoff MVP for that league.
Yeah. He's a high compete guy. And even last year at 16, he stepped up his game in the playoff last year. If you look at his stats from last year regular season versus like the playoff, there was like a big jump in his stats. But he's a gamer. Like one thing that's difficult about him, he played on the BCHL is a weaker league, and their team was stacked. So I think they lost 5 games all year.
Wow.
So, and a lot of games were like 7-1, 6-1, 7-1. So I was I watched him a lot during the year, but at some point I had to stop because those games are useless. So I left him alone for a while and just came back to him at the end of the year when he in the semifinal and the final, and he played against a better competition there, and he was really good in the semi and in the final. So yeah, I think he's a good option at 31 for Montreal. Do you want to move to you want me to talk about the other guys here?
Yeah,
sure, absolutely. Yeah, who else do you think might fit in there?
Well, I think if I go maybe a local pick, Ethan Gauthier, who plays for Sherbrooke. His dad is former NHLer Denis Gauthier, former Flyers, former Flames. Not really the same physique. Ethan is a bit on the small side, around 5'11", but he plays like he's 6'3", 220, like his dad. He's a hardworking, smart forward that can play anywhere in your lineup. He played most on the wing this year, but I think he can play a bit of at center. He's tough to play against. He's one of the more physical player in this draft. And he had a good year with Sherbrooke, and he saw his role change a bit over the course of the season. With Sherbrooke made a lot of trades, so at some point he lost his PP1 usage, but at the end of the day, I think he's a pretty safe bet for NHL. I think, and I think depending what Montreal list looks like, I think he could be an option at 31 or 32 for them. I don't have him, as a top 32 player in this draft, but I could see him being an option for Montreal at that range.
It's just interesting when you see birthplace of Phoenix, Arizona, and of course that was because of his dad. But he has that dual citizenship and competed for Canada in the Hlinka Cup, and I think he got the most goals in at Hlinka as well.
Yeah, he was great at that tournament. He showed some pretty good skill. Even I was surprised at some of those plays. But I always say that tournament is the most overrated tournament of the year. And I honestly, I was seeing his rankings and his online rankings from different lists, and I feel like they were just based on what he did at the Hlinka. So he was ranked pretty high all year, but I think only us at some point didn't have him in the first round, and it's not going to change. But I still like the player. I take him on my team any day. He's the type of player you want on your team, and you want that player in the playoff. But if you're going to rank him top 15, you better be a top 6 forward, and I don't think that's what he is.
So those two players, Gauthier and Nadeau, are forwards. If the Canadiens take a forward at the 5th overall pick, do you think they'll be looking for a defenseman with that second first-round pick. And do you have a defenseman for us?
Yeah, I went with a local pick again. Etienne Morin from the Moncton Wildcats. He's a kid from just outside Montreal. He had a fantastic season with Moncton. Didn't really start well. I remember my first viewing of the year with him, and that was in Sherbrooke, and I was like, the skating looks really not good. But that's a kid that was one of the first week of the season. He was still really weak, and he just came back from mono. He had mono in the summer and lost, I think, like 15, 20 pounds.
Yikes.
And he missed the Olympia tournament because of that. So it took him a while to get back to 100%. But once he did, like, he was one of the best defensemen in the league. Like, he scored 20 plus goals, 70 plus points. Smart player, can really shoot the puck from the point. Pretty deceptive player too. The skating is my question mark with him. Like, if he was a great skater, I think he'd be guaranteed top 32. How much improvement can he make to his skating? And technically, skating is not too bad. It's a lot of it. I feel like it's a lack of power, and I wonder if can he gain that power in the next few years. I think that's going to be really telling. Because there's not many bad skating defensemen in the NHL. So he's not a bad skater, but it's definitely, to me, my big question mark with him, because the rest of his game is quite good. He actually reminds me of William Trudeau, that Montreal draft pick,
who had a great season.
Because and he had the same kind of issue in his draft year. He's smart, and Morin is definitely more talented than Trudeau. And well, to be fair, Trudeau was a bit of a late bloomer, so it's a very different background here. But Trudeau was very smart about we like the way he moved the puck, like Morin does, but I was like, oh man, the footwork is just questionable. And then 2-3 years later, it looks fine in American Hockey League this season. So sometimes it's just the kids; they just need to get more power and more hit the gym, and that can help a bit their skating.
So we're anxiously awaiting your final draft rankings and the production, the release, the launch of the Black Book. But if we look back to your January draft rankings, I see in your top 32 you have 4 goaltenders. Not saying that there'll be 4 in your final rankings, but is this suggesting that 2023 is a pretty good goaltending class, and maybe you can mention some of the names that you have your eye on?
Yeah, it's definitely a good goalie class. Finally, we have a good goalie class, because the last few years have been not great. A few names. Well, I mean, one of them was, other than Connor Bedard, he was the star of the World Junior. It was Adam Gajan from Slovakia. So this is a guy who went undrafted last season. So he's same birth year as Slavkovsky, but never drafted. I even went back on Instats, which is like a video platform that Scout used to watch video, and there was 0 video of him available last year.
So, oh my!
Yeah. So he came to North America this season, played mostly in the North American Hockey League, and had made Slovakia's team, and nobody really know too much about him other than if you really watched the North American Hockey League. And he was incredible at this tournament. And then he played. I think he played close to 10 games with Green Bay in the USHL, but I think his contract was a 10 game contract. So he went back in the North American Hockey League in late January, early February, and then he finished the season there. But like really interesting story, like just came out of nowhere. And then you watch him play, you're like, how is this even possible? Because he's 6'4", he moves like he's one of the best athletes in the draft. He moves super well, and he competes hard. Like, there's a lot to like with this goalie. So he's definitely one that I'm gonna keep an eye on where he goes in the draft.
And he's off to UMD, University of Minnesota Duluth, next year, which is a really good hockey program. So
I actually read that he's not gonna go there next year. He's gonna play. He's gonna play in Green Bay next season instead of going college route. Yeah, I just read this with Google Translate on a Slovakian website. But that's what he said. So
pushing back his commitment to UMD.
Yeah, I think maybe he just want to get like a full year in the USHL before going there. But honestly, he could like have a great year in the USHL next year and just sign pro right after EB20. So it's not impossible. This happens. Another goalie from USHL, Jacob Fowler, just won the USHL championship with Youngstown. He's been, of all the goalies, I think he might have been the most consistent all year. He won I believe he won the MVP of the USHL playoff. He won gold with Team USA at the Junior A Challenge in December. And he was great all year for Youngstown. He's a big kid, 6'1", 6'2", 210. So he's definitely an option if a team wants a goalie in the top 2 rounds. There's other guy like Michael Rabol, who's a goalie from Czechia who also played in the USHL. He's going to play at UMass next season. He played for Omaha this season in the USHL.
Big goaltender.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 6'6", super agile. Had a, I would say, decent U18. Like, started really good, and I think in the second half of the tournament he started struggling a little bit against better team. But he's definitely again like another player to keep an eye on for goalie wise. And there's other kid like Carson Bjarnason from the WHL. He was Canada #1 goalie at the U18. Really struggled at this event. It's been up and down with him this season. Like when he's on, he looks like a real future #1 goalie, and when he's not, he looks like a guy who will probably never play. So he needs to find more consistency in his game. But there's like a lot of other goalie, like Damian Clara is an Italian goalie.
Wow.
Plays in Sweden this year. Like he's a monster. Like Rabel, 6'6", super athletic, super raw too. Like gives up a lot of goals, but man, his technique with his size and the way he moves, it looks like could be like a very good, I don't know where he's going to go in the draft, but he could be a very, good sleeper pick for a team.
Well, I think it's pretty exciting that there are not only a ton of options at the goaltending position for this draft, but just as we said at the top of the segment, just how deep this draft is and how much there's so many options for teams, particularly in the first round, but definitely into the second as well. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out in just a few weeks at the end of the month. Jerome Berube, Director of Scouting for Hockey Prospect, we can't thank you enough for being here with us again. If you're not following Jerome on Twitter already, be sure to do that at Jerome_Berube. Congratulations, sir, on another approaching the end of another year's worth of work prior to this year's draft. We know that you work You and the entire team at Hockey Prospect work exceptionally hard all year round to culminate right in things right before the draft. And if you haven't done so, be sure to mark it on your calendar that you want to pick up your copy of the NHL Draft Black Book from Hockey Prospect. Jerome, where can people check out your work, Hockey Prospect work in general, and order a Black Book when it becomes available?
Yeah. Well, the website is hockeyprospect.com. Pretty easy to remember. Once the book is out, it will be available in PDF format on our website. And if you want the print version, which is like a little hockey draft Bible,
little not being the key word there.
Yeah.
It's a good size.
Yeah. That is available on Amazon. So, and obviously Amazon is pretty quick to deliver usually. So, yeah. So this is where you can get our book once it's out.
Terrific. Well, congratulations once again, and thank you again for joining us once more here on the Canadiens Connection podcast. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Wow, that was a great interview. And listen, just looking back at the last few weeks of the Canadiens Connection podcast, as you said, we've been doing a series with draft experts. Canadiens Connection episode 244 featured Russ Cohn. Last week, episode 245, Sam Cosentino from Sportsnet, and this week with Jerome Berube from the Hockey Prospect. They all do things a little bit differently. They all come to different conclusions, but they're all experts in this area. Interesting names mentioned there are Focus by Jerome Berube on Will Smith, Zach Benson, and Matvei Michkov. But even more interesting to me is when you look at the bottom of the draft, that 31-32 spot for the Canadiens, the kind of depth of knowledge that Jerome has, identifying three players there, and then going on to talk about the strength of the goaltending prospects in this year's draft. So lots of tremendous information there and in the last two podcasts, and to give you a complete picture as you start thinking about who the Canadiens should select in the upcoming June draft.
And don't forget, we do have, Rick, a new Canadiens Connection question of the week this week. What is it that we want to hear from our listeners the answer to?
Well, Lotto Quebec has placed top odds on the Canadiens pick, either being Michkov or Will Smith. Well, who do our listeners want out of those two? Who, if available, who would Canadiens Connection listeners want the Montreal Canadiens to pick?
That's a very good question. Last week, when on Canadiens Connection episode 245, titled "Responding to Smith, Leonard, or Reinbacher," we had some answers to last week's question of the week. In fact, I believe you have a message from Jim in Lethbridge, Alberta.
Yeah, he texted us, and as we ask you to do, please let us know your first name and where you're texting from.
Yes.
Texted us at 5853-ROCKET. And Jim says, I love this series with the draft experts. I liked what he's referring to Sam Cosentino from Sportsnet, said about Ryan Leonard. Habs need a player who will be a force in the playoffs. I'd take him at 5. And we remember that Sam was pretty high on Ryan Leonard, and part of the U.S. national team, line mate of Will Smith. And Sam's comments were that Ryan Leonard is a rugged player with a motor that doesn't quit, just has an extremely high compete level, and has one of the hardest shots in the draft. So thank you, Jim. And he agrees with what Sam had to say about Ryan Leonard.
Thank you to Jim for writing in. You can do the same. Text us at 5853-ROCKET. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's a response to this week's question of the week, or if you just have a question, a statement, a comment, we'd love to hear from you. If you don't want to miss the Canadiens Connection podcast wherever you wish to consume it, then be sure you've subscribed on your favorite podcast platform or on the youtube.com/allhabs site. and you certainly won't miss a single episode. And thanks to all of you for listening. We appreciate you being here every year. We appreciate every week, I should say. We appreciate your constant loyalty and listenership, which allows us to grow. And we look forward to talking to you next week on another very fun episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Visit allhabs.net for breaking news about the Montreal Canadiens.